Good evening everyone, and thank you for joining me today as we dive deep into one of the most revealing weeks of the NFL season. Week 14 has come and gone, and what we witnessed over these past few days was nothing short of a reality check for multiple franchises across the league. Today I want to spend some time really unpacking what happened, what it means, and where we go from here, because this wasn't just another week of football. This was a week where pretenders were separated from contenders, where illusions were shattered, and where some very difficult truths had to be confronted head-on. Let me start with the Kansas City Chiefs, because if there's one team that absolutely cannot escape the spotlight this week, it's them. 4 years now, we've watched this organization operate at a level that seemed almost untouchable. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, this core group has delivered championships, clutch performances, and a dynasty that rivals anything we've seen in the modern era. But Week 14 exposed something that Chiefs Kingdom has been trying to ignore for weeks now, and that's the fact that this team, as currently constructed, has some serious vulnerabilities that can no longer be brushed aside or explained away by pointing to their championship pedigree. The harsh truth that Kansas City must confront is that their offense is not operating at the elite level we've become accustomed to seeing. Now, before anyone accuses me of overreacting to one game or 1 week, let me be clear, this isn't about a single performance. This is about a trend that has been building throughout the season. The explosive plays aren't there with the same frequency. The deep passing game that used to terrify defensive coordinators has become inconsistent at best. And perhaps most concerning of all, Patrick Mahomes himself has looked merely good rather than transcendent, which for him represents a significant departure from what we've seen throughout his career. When you look at the receiving core, you have to acknowledge that the departure of Tyreek Hill continues to cast a long shadow over this offense. Yes, they've tried to adapt. Yes, they've brought in new pieces. But the reality is that they haven't found that game-breaking, defense-stretching element that Hill provided. Travis Kelce remains excellent, but he's getting older, and asking him to carry the entire passing attack on his shoulders is neither fair nor sustainable. The other receivers have shown flashes, but flashes don't win championships when you need consistency week after week. The offensive line, which was supposed to be a strength, has had its moments of struggle. Mahomes has been under pressure more than we're used to seeing, and when you have a quarterback who thrives on extending plays and creating magic outside of structure, putting him under duress fundamentally changes what your offense can accomplish. It's forced them to become more conservative, more predictable, and ultimately less dangerous than the Chiefs teams that won those Super Bowls. But here's where it gets even more concerning for Kansas City. The defense, which was supposed to pick up the slack while the offense figured things out, has been inconsistent in its own right. Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defensive coordinators in football, and they've invested significant resources on that side of the ball, but they're still giving up plays they shouldn't, still allowing opponents to stay in games longer than they should, and still showing vulnerabilities that good quarterbacks can exploit. The truth that the Chiefs must face is that they're no longer the prohibitive favorite in the AFC. They're no longer the team that other contenders fear most. They're a very good team with an incredible quarterback and a Hall of Fame coach, but they're beatable, they're flawed, and they're going to have to make some difficult decisions about how to address these issues if they want to make another deep playoff run. The margin for error has shrunk considerably, and in a conference as loaded as the AFC, that's a dangerous position to be in. Now, let's broaden our perspective and talk about some of the other winners and losers from Week 14, because the Chiefs weren't the only team dealing with harsh realities. The entire landscape of the NFL was reshaped in significant ways, and we need to understand what that means for the playoff picture and beyond. One of the biggest winners of the week has to be any team that capitalized on favorable matchups and used this week as a springboard to build momentum heading into the final stretch. In the NFL, momentum is a real and tangible thing. When teams start believing in themselves, when they start executing at a high level week after week, that confidence becomes infectious. It spreads through the locker room, it shows up on film, and it makes other teams take notice. The teams that won convincingly in Week 14, that showed they can dominate in all 3 phases of the game, those are the teams that are peaking at exactly the right time. On the flip side, some franchises walked away from Week 14 with their season hanging by a thread. I'm talking about teams that entered this week still clinging to playoff hopes, still believing they could turn things around, only to suffer defeats that didn't just hurt in the standings but that exposed fundamental problems with their roster construction, their coaching, or their overall identity as a football team. Those losses sting differently because they force everyone in the organization to ask themselves some very uncomfortable questions. The quarterback position, as always, was at the center of many of Week 14's most important storylines. We saw quarterbacks who elevated their teams in crucial moments, making the kind of throws and decisions that separate franchise players from journeymen. But we also saw quarterbacks struggle under pressure, make costly mistakes, and show why their teams might need to start thinking about other options moving forward. The quarterback evaluation process is ongoing, and Week 14 provided plenty of evidence for teams to consider as they plan for both the immediate future and the long term. Let me spend a moment talking about the teams in the middle of the pack, because they represent perhaps the most fascinating element of what Week 14 revealed. These are the franchises hovering around 500, still mathematically alive in the playoff race but needing almost everything to go right over the final weeks. Some of these teams showed in Week 14 that they have the capability to make a run. They displayed resilience, they executed in crunch time, and they gave their fan bases reason to believe. But others in this group reinforced the notion that they're just not quite good enough, that they're a piece or two away, that this might not be their year after all. The coaching decisions in Week 14 also deserve serious scrutiny. We saw head coaches make bold calls that paid off beautifully and others make choices that will be questioned and debated for weeks to come. Fourth down decisions, clock management, whether to be aggressive or conservative, these are the margins that separate winning organizations from losing ones. And in Week 14, we saw examples of both brilliant coaching and head-scratching decision-making that cost teams dearly. Special teams play, often overlooked until it goes wrong, was a significant factor in multiple Week 14 games. A missed field goal here, a poor punt there, a breakdown in coverage on a return, these seemingly small mistakes compound and can completely alter the trajectory of a game. Teams with reliable special teams units have an advantage that's hard to quantify but impossible to ignore, and Week 14 reminded us once again why this phase of the game matters so much. The injury situation across the league continues to be a storyline that affects everything. Week 14 saw some key players go down, some others return from injury, and all of it impacts not just the teams directly involved but the entire playoff picture. Depth is being tested, next man up mentality is being put to the ultimate challenge, and some organizations are proving they have the infrastructure to overcome adversity while others are being exposed as too thin to compete when their stars aren't available. When we think about the broader implications of what Week 14 revealed, we have to consider the playoff picture in both conferences. In the AFC, the race is absolutely wide open. Yes, certain teams have positioned themselves well, but there's no juggernaut, no team that feels inevitable. The Chiefs, despite their challenges, are still very much in the mix, but so are several other franchises that have their own compelling cases for why they could emerge from the conference. The parity we're seeing means that seeding is going to matter enormously, that home field advantage could be the difference between advancing and going home, and that every single game from here on out carries tremendous weight. In the NFC, we're seeing a similar dynamic play out, though with its own unique characteristics. Some teams are establishing themselves as legitimate contenders while others are fading at exactly the wrong time. Week 14 provided clarity about which teams have the complete package and which ones are still searching for an identity or missing crucial elements. The gap between the best teams in the NFC and the rest of the conference became more apparent this week, and that's going to influence how we think about playoff matchups and Super Bowl possibilities. Let's talk about what all of this means for the coaching carousel that's about to spin into action. Several teams are clearly evaluating whether their current head coach is the right person to lead them forward. Week 14 performances, both good and bad, are being analyzed by owners and general managers who have to make decisions about the future. Some coaches solidified their positions this week with impressive wins. Others may have coached their last few games without even knowing it yet, because the performance on the field spoke volumes about where their programs are headed. The draft implications of Week 14 also cannot be ignored. 4 teams that are out of playoff contention, every loss from here on out potentially improves their draft position, which means there's a delicate balance between trying to win for pride and development purposes while also being realistic about where you stand and what's best for the long-term future of the franchise. Week 14 results shuffled the draft order in meaningful ways, and for teams looking at a rebuild or a retool, that matters a great deal. Now, coming back to the Chiefs specifically, because I think their situation warrants additional examination, the question becomes, what do they do about it? They're not going to panic, that's not how Andy Reid operates, and Patrick Mahomes isn't the type of player who's going to press or lose confidence in himself or his teammates. But they do need to be honest about what's working and what isn't. They need to figure out whether there are schematic adjustments that can unlock more of their offensive potential, whether there are personnel changes that need to be made, and whether they're prepared to play a different style of football than what got them championships in previous years. The reality for Kansas City is that their path to another Super Bowl is going to require them to win games in ways they're not used to winning. They might need to rely more heavily on the defense. They might need to win ugly, grinding games where they possess the ball, run it effectively, and don't turn it over rather than getting into shootouts. They might need Mahomes to be more of a game manager at times rather than always trying to create explosive plays. That's a difficult adjustment for any team to make, especially one that's built its identity around offensive fireworks, but adaptation is essential in the NFL, and the great organizations are the ones that can evolve when circumstances demand it. What makes the Chiefs' situation particularly interesting is that they still have all the pieces to figure this out. Mahomes is still Mahomes, even if he's not playing at his absolute peak. Reid is still one of the sharpest offensive minds in football. They have playmakers on both sides of the ball. The infrastructure is sound. But infrastructure alone doesn't win games in December and January. Execution does. Consistency does. Making plays in critical moments does. And right now, the Chiefs are searching for that level of reliability. Week 14 also reminded us that in the NFL, narratives can shift incredibly quickly. A team that looks unstoppable one week can be exposed the next. A quarterback who appears to be struggling can suddenly catch fire and lead his team on a run. A defense that's been getting torched can make adjustments and become dominant. Nothing is permanent in this league, and the teams that understand that stay humble and hungry regardless of their record or their reputation, those are the ones that tend to succeed when the stakes are highest. As we look ahead to the final weeks of the regular season, Week 14 serves as a valuable checkpoint. It showed us which teams are genuinely built for a championship run and which ones are frauds waiting to be exposed in the playoffs. It revealed coaching decisions that will be replayed on highlight reels and others that will haunt coaches all off-season. It provided data points about individual players who are stepping up when it matters most and others who are shrinking under the pressure. For fans of teams that won in Week 14, there's renewed optimism and belief. For fans of teams that lost, there's frustration and worry and the nagging fear that maybe this just isn't going to be their year. But that's what makes the NFL so compelling. Every week matters. Every play can change a season. Every decision by a coach or a player ripples out and affects everything that comes after. The Chiefs, for all their struggles and concerns, are still one of the most dangerous teams in football because of who they have under center and on the sideline. But they're also more vulnerable than they've been in years, and that vulnerability means other teams in the AFC smell blood in the water. The race is on, and Week 14 made it clear that nothing is guaranteed, that every team still alive in the playoff hunt has work to do, and that the margin between success and failure is razor thin. As we close out this analysis of Week 14 and what it means for the Chiefs and the broader NFL landscape, the ultimate takeaway is this. Truth has a way of revealing itself in this league. You can hide behind past success for only so long. You can talk about potential and talent and championship pedigree, but at some point, you have to go out and prove it on the field, week after week, against the best competition in the world. Week 14 was a truth-telling week, and the teams that listened to what that truth was saying, that adjusted and adapted and came out ready to face their harsh realities head-on, those are the teams that are going to be playing meaningful football in January. The Chiefs must confront these harsh truths not as a death sentence but as a challenge. Championships aren't won by pretending problems don't exist. They're won by acknowledging them, addressing them, and finding solutions even when those solutions are uncomfortable or require change. Kansas City has the talent and the leadership to do exactly that, but the clock is ticking, the competition is fierce, and Week 14 made it abundantly clear that nothing is going to be handed to them. They're going to have to earn every single victory from here on out, and that might just be exactly what they need to rediscover the championship form that's made them the standard for excellence in the NFL for the past several years. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to seeing how all of these storylines continue to develop as we head down the stretch toward the playoffs.